Well, thank you, everybody. And Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, sir, for that very kind introduction and the welcome to this spectacular city. I'm from Florida in the United States, which is the warmest of our states. And I think I know a nice warm welcome when I see one. And I particularly commend you for the extraordinary work you're doing hosting this conference. Fred, thank you so much for putting this together and welcoming me and allowing me a few moments to discuss these important topics. And I definitely want to greet my good friend, the Chad of Poland here, and say thank you, sir. I look forward to a nice quiet lunch today with some pierogies and kielbasa, and we'll solve all the world's problems one by one. I know everyone gets nervous when they see someone who has a PowerPoint presentation. In fact, it's often said the most dangerous thing in the world today is a military officer from the United States with a PowerPoint presentation. But this one is easy. I will simply put up a few photographs, a few images to illustrate a couple of points, and I'll do exactly what Damon asked me to do, which is to talk a bit about the challenges facing the alliance and what we're doing about them, what we're thinking about. And I'll do all that in 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time to take some questions and have a good dialogue. I do want to unveil something today. As Damon indicated, we are in an era of increasing financial austerity. Defense budgets are coming down, and I've been working on something in my headquarters to try and bring innovation to the way we train. Next slide. So we're going to save a little money doing that. In all seriousness, next slide. Let me begin by saying, as I always do at any presentation, that I believe NATO is a bridge. It's an effective bridge, and this bridge may be one that people recognize here. It's in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the eastern part of that country. It's the bridge over the Drina River, and it figured in the title of the novel, The Bridge Over the Drina by Indro Avic, the great Nobel laureate from this part of the world. I think bridges are important. They bring us together, they connect us. They are built at a place where human need meets accomplishment. And I think NATO continues to be a bridge today, a bridge in time that connects us with our history and our past, a bridge of culture and language that connects today 28 nations. And indeed, I think above all, NATO is a bridge to the future. Hence the title of my presentation. And again, if you'll permit me a nautical metaphor, I think NATO very much will sail on very effectively into this turbulent 21st century. So why does NATO exist? Next, please. This is the class of 1914 from Saint-Cyr, the French military academy. The photograph was taken in 1914, the graduating class. By 1918, everybody in this photograph is dead. Not some of them, not most of them, not many of them, all of them. Poland knows war as well. And I think as we look back on the calamitous, the difficult, the disastrous 20th century in Europe, where 60 million people lost their lives in 2 wars, one of the great strengths of NATO is that it has brought this continent together. We have avoided conflict here. And I think that is crucial and important as we think about NATO sailing forward. Next, please. This is what we seek to avoid. And I hardly need to emphasize in a city like this that suffered devastating attack at the end of the last World War, here in Poland that suffered greatly, in a continent that lost 20 million minimum in the Second World War alone, the importance of continuing security arrangements so we avoid these kind of calamitous events. Next, please. So that brings us to NATO, forged as a result of that war and the wars of the 20th century. Today, it's a big table, 28 nations around that table. Sometimes I am asked, Admiral, is it hard as the operations officer for NATO? Is it difficult to move your operations forward with so many nations having the opportunity to comment, to be part of the dialogue? And the answer is no. Today we have 130,000 NATO soldiers and sailors and airmen who are in Afghanistan. They are in the Balkans. They're flying air policing missions. They're at sea conducting counter-piracy. They are training. They are operating. And it all passes through this council. And in my view, it works effectively. Next, please. I talked a little about austerity earlier. We are in a time of financial austerity, yet we should remember how resource-rich this NATO alliance is. These are GDPs around the world: European Union, United States. Japan and China, of course, have large GDPs. That next tier down, many of the Europeans. And then Spain and Canada. These are the 12 largest GDPs in the world, of which 9 are NATO members. And in the upper right is the GDP of NATO, $31 trillion. We have 6 million men and women under arms in NATO, almost all of them volunteers. So this is an alliance not only with deep historical purpose, with a functioning political process, but also significant resources. Next, please. So let me talk about some challenges. Whenever I begin with challenges to discuss the European context, I think one that is worth considering is demographics. It's the aging of the European population. 9 of the 10 countries that will suffer the greatest reduction in their populations, 9 of 10 are in Europe over the next 20 or 30 years. It's in the Baltics, it's in the Balkans. It is also part of Russia's future, unless demographics change dramatically, which is unlikely, as well as some of the Western European nations. Demographics will impact security in a variety of ways, reducing the numbers of young men and women who are available to serve, putting pressures on financial systems, as well as creating social fabric pressures as a result of immigration, which will inevitably come as a result of these demographic shifts. This is not NATO's problem to solve at all, but it is worth understanding it in the context of the European security challenges going forward. Next, please. More obviously, perhaps, Europe is very much part of the challenge we face as an alliance and as a larger coalition in Afghanistan. Often people say Afghanistan is NATO's great challenge. Well, NATO is very involved there, and in my view, we can and will succeed in Afghanistan. It's important to remember that there are 28 NATO nations, but in total there are 49 nations from around the world that have troops on the ground, and 70 nations that are actively involved in contributing resources, financing, and other support to this effort. So this is a challenge, but it is one that is being met not only by NATO, but also by a much larger global coalition. Next, please. This is an awful picture. This is a parliament building in Sarajevo being attacked by tank fire and destroyed. It was the beginning stages of the siege of Sarajevo. I mentioned this in the context of progress. 15 years ago, Sarajevo underwent a 3-year siege, the longest in modern history. Today, when we look at the Balkans, we see enormous progress since those times. Today, Slovenia, Croatia, Albania are members of NATO. Damon Wilson just came from meetings in Montenegro to discuss their very active and forward-moving map. There are other nations in the Balkans that aspire to membership. We are working with Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example. We have come a long way since these days. We have come a long way since 8,000 men and boys were killed in a week in Srebrenica. So the challenges of the Balkans remain. It is a difficult part of the world, and yet the progress since these days is noteworthy. And as we look at Afghanistan and we think of the challenges of Afghanistan, we should recall how difficult the Balkans looked to us 10 years ago, not just in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also Kosovo more recently. We can make progress from moments like this as an international community.